Well, good morning, friends, and welcome to a very special Windows on the World presentation here at Eastern University on the Chamberlain Interfaith Fellowship, a Jewish-Christian student interfaith exchange of shared learning between Temple Bet Shalom, a Reformed Jewish temple in Needham, Massachusetts, about 10 miles outside of Boston, and Eastern University, a Christian liberal arts university in St. David's, Pennsylvania, with the motto of faith, reason, and justice. And we're glad you joined us this morning. I'm Joseph Modica, and I serve as the university chaplain at Eastern University. Especially if you're visiting with us this morning, we're grateful that you're here. The Chamberlain Interfaith Fellowship began officially in the fall of 2015 and is named after the late Dr. Ted Chamberlain, who served Eastern University for nearly 30 years as Dean and Vice President of Student Development. And I had the privilege of working closely with Dr. Chamberlain for 13 years, and I've learned so much about student development from him. The fellowship now is in its 6th year, and that's just wonderful. Both institutions deeply miss being in person together because of the COVID-19 pandemic. In the fall, we would be at Temple Bet Shalom, and in the spring, now we would be at Eastern University. And we are hopeful that as more people get vaccinated and we continue to remain vigilant concerning the COVID-19 virus, we'll soon be in person once again, and we do look forward to that. We are honored to have members of the Chamberlain family with us this morning, especially Dr. Chamberlain's widow, a dear friend to myself and Eastern University, Leria Chamberlain. So Leria, would you just wave and just, Leria, we're grateful to have you this morning. And if I'm not mistaken, I think I also saw Jenny might be here also, one of your daughters. Oh, Jenny, hi. I'm grateful that you're here this morning also. We will hear more about Dr. Chamberlain from his dear friend, David Feldman, when David offers a few remarks in a few minutes. David and his wife, Sydney, through their vision, generosity, and steady leadership, established the Chamberlain Interfaith Fellowship. And friends, simply without them and without their vision and generosity, there would be no fellowship today. So Sydney and David, I know you're here. Why don't you give a wave if you wouldn't mind? Oh, they're sharing a Zoom screen. So welcome and thank you so much. Oh, so this fellowship includes students from both institutions that actually fill out an application and are interviewed, and they serve for a year. So as a public service announcement, especially if you're an university student or you know someone that might be interested, could you please email me directly? We are now looking for potential applicants for the next academic year, 2021-22. So if you know someone, or if you are interested yourself, please go ahead and send me an email. I would love to make sure you are on the list there. I'm going to just take a moment to share a couple of slides here to give you a feel for the program itself. This will go very quickly, but we have been just honored to be part of visiting Temple Bet Shalom in Needham, Massachusetts every fall. These are some of the photos of past cohorts and what they learn when they're together. And wow, this is a fascinating study that Rachel Happel, my friend and colleague, does every year. Of course, we have a lot of fun and we sit around a lot and talk and eat and converse. And and there they are doing a social justice, putting together a soup to be used in the ministry at Temple Bet Shalom. What's wonderful is that David Feldman, through his vision and leadership at Northwestern Mutual, was given a $15,000 service award a couple of years back that has helped the Chamberlain Interfaith Fellowship really flourish there too. So we're grateful. So many grateful things this morning to share with all of you. I am going to now just show you an introductory video, and then I will introduce one of our speakers this morning. This is a video that was put together by Hannah Andrews, of cohort 3. It's 2 minutes. And for those of you who are part of Eastern University, you'll see that it was mostly filmed on our campus. So let's take a look.
The Chamberlain Interfaith Fellowship is a partnership between students at Eastern University and high school students at Temple Beth Shalom. We come together twice over the course of a year just to have interfaith conversations, to build bridges between our religions. I think there's something beautiful on the connection between the religions because we all share the same God. And because of that, I really wanted to apply for the fellowship. Something that's been a challenge is to think about this is how someone else sees the same thing that I'm looking at from a different light.
We kept having these conversations where Joe would say, here's something that I would want to talk about, and I would say, oh, here's a Jewish spin on that actually ends up being we start with the same word and it ends up with something completely different.
Some of my favorite parts just were when we were having fun. I loved the discussions. I loved getting to explore what I really believe in and solidifying that, being able to articulate it, I think was formative for me. My favorite thing that I learned, it's a hard question to answer, I think, because I don't know if it was a specific thing as much as just getting to learn about Jewish culture as a whole. They have so much symbolism tied into everything they do. I learned a little bit about what it means to be Jewish, both ethnically and in terms of faith. And I'm going to be able to take that with me wherever I go. If I could say something to new fellows that are coming in, I would say it's really important to walk into this with the mindset of seek first to understand than to be understood. Let yourself be teachable. So I think going in and asking others questions and being curious, because that will incite curiosity in them as well.
Some of you may recognize that the featured student, Nika Skelton, now Nika Gunter, is one of our admission counselors now. She works at the university there, so we're grateful for Nika. And Rachel, I'm always trying to remember what got me to laugh so robustly there. I'm trying to think of what you said, but it was wonderful, I'm sure. This morning, I like to introduce a kind and generous person who has become a dear friend along with his wife, Sydney, the founder and visionary leader, David Feldman, who through his vision a number of years ago began to have conversations with the university about how to remember well a dear friend, Dr. Ted Chamberlain, who passed away suddenly in 2010. David and Sydney epitomized the heart of the Chamberlain Interfaith Fellowship with their abiding hospitality, care, and generosity. When I travel to Temple Beth Shalom with students, I have the opportunity to spend a number of days with the Feldman when we're on site there. So please welcome this morning, David Feldman.
Thank you, Joe. Good morning, everybody. And my apologies to those people that had to listen to me last night as well, because some of the content will be very familiar. But for those of you that weren't, here's a little background on the origin of the Chamberlain Interfaith Fellowship. Ted, as Joe mentioned, was a dean of students at Eastern from 1976 through 2004 and had a profound influence on the community he served. He was a person of deep faith and was interested in learning and sharing with those whose religious traditions differed from his own, and encouraged his students and colleagues to follow his example. He was warm, modest, and a friendly leader whose example was profound and easy to follow. Our friendship began when we were toddlers who lived 5 houses away from one another in Newton Center, Massachusetts, some 7 decades ago. It continued until his unexpected demise in 2010 and grew to include our wives, our children and their spouses, and the 12 grandchildren we share. We spent thousands of hours together over that long time span, and I was privileged to speak at his funeral with another close friend and colleague of Ted's. That was a powerful experience for me and helped me realize what a privilege it was to maintain a close friendship with a person of his character. Ted's passing was a great loss for his family, his friends, colleagues, and the students he served. He left a great legacy, which was well worth perpetuating. After talking to his wife, Lyria, we approached Eastern University and Temple Beth Shalom to see if they were interested in a series of monthly phone calls to determine if a program focusing on interfaith relationships and learning could be created in Ted's memory as a lasting legacy of the example he set and an opportunity for students from both institutions to learn about other faith traditions. After a year of confirming, everybody agreed that such an initiative had merit and the fellowship was born. The very first year, when students arrived from Eastern in Needham, Massachusetts at Temple Beth Shalom for the very first fellowship with Dr. Joe Modica, their chaplain and leader, we had a dinner for them and their friends and cohorts from Temple Beth Shalom. Following the dinner, everyone attended our traditional Sabbath service. At the conclusion of every weekly service, our rabbi reads the names of all those congregants and their family members who passed away during the last 30 days, or whose anniversary of their passing was that week. Rabbi J. Perlman read all the names and concluded the list with the name Dr. Ted Chamberlain. His name has been read every year since. That gesture sets the tone for the weekend and expresses the essence of the fellowship. I would be remiss if I did not express my deep sense of gratitude to Joe Modica and Rachel Happel, who planned the curriculum for the fellowship and exhibit a level of professionalism which is really extraordinary. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy the Windows on the World.
Well, thank you, David Feldman, for those kind remarks. And your relationship with Dr. Ted Chamberlain is a model for us all. It is a model of how we are to live in the world with our different religions and our different beliefs, and yet we work towards the common good. So thank you for sharing those meaningful words. I'd like to introduce my colleague, my partner, the one who I work alongside with in this fellowship, and I am privileged to do so. She is an outstanding professional and a Jewish educator who epitomizes the commitment to student-centeredness and flourishing, and a commitment to a vibrant and integrative Jewish education for students, because I've seen it happen when I've been on ground, especially at Temple Beth Shalom. And it's so refreshing to me as a Christian to see the religious commitment of a wholeness in their curriculum there. Rachel Happel received a Master's of Arts degree in Jewish Communal Service and an MBA from Brandeis University, as well as a Bachelor of Arts degree from Williams College. And we are so delighted to have Rachel's oldest daughter, Evie, as part of cohort 6. So it's been wonderful. We had Rabbi J. Perlman's daughter, Liana, as one of the cohorts, and now we have Rachel's daughter too. So Rachel, please come and share what we're going to do next. Thank you.
Thank you for that nice introduction, Joe. It is wonderful to be here. I always love coming to Eastern in person in the spring and seeing your campus in full bloom and meeting students, both those who are fellows and those who aren't, eating in the dining commons and walking around the campus and participating in the yacht club. I always enjoy all of those moments at Eastern. And this year, I'm thrilled to be with you virtually and see all of you in your boxes, but hopefully we'll be back in person soon when it's safe to do so. This year has been an unusual year for the fellowship because of the pandemic and the way we've had to adjust what we're doing. We've done a lot on Zoom, and the fellows have had an opportunity already to get to know each other. Even though we're just starting our sort of retreat weekend now, we've had a few online sessions together, and they have had the opportunity to meet one-on-one with one fellow from each institution a couple times a month for what we call sichot, which in Hebrew means conversations, which are guided conversations about faith and belief and practice and getting to know each other. And so they've already had some opportunity to get to know each other and participate in learning together. So we've asked them for this session to reflect on both the challenges and the blessings of interfaith learning and community building. And so the fellows from Temple Beth Shalom are high school students, and they are actually in school right now, so they weren't able to join us live for this session this morning. So we have pre-recorded statements from them about the blessings and challenges of interfaith learning, but the Eastern University Fellows are of course here with us live and will be sharing their words live. So with that, we're going to start with the challenges of interfaith learning, and the first person to share is going to be Caitlin. So Caitlin, I call on you to begin.
Hi, everyone. My name is Caitlin Casey. I am a sophomore double major in social work and biblical studies here at Eastern. And I'd say one of the new ideas that I've encountered in my conversations with my fellow, who is Hannah, has been the fact that we as Christians look at Judaism through such a Christian lens and kind of unlearning that lens, seeing Judaism through a Jewish lens, and kind of acknowledging how even though Christianity has its roots in Judaism, there are still so many differences, even in interpretation and in the way in which that we approach the Torah or the Tanakh and all of like the ancient texts and scriptures. And it's been difficult at times to kind of unlearn those things, but it's also been so amazing to learn that as well.
Hi, I'm Hannah Fleichner. I'm a junior at Needham High School. I'm at Temple Beth Shalom in Needham, Massachusetts, where I'm actually currently right now. And one thing that I've come across during our interfaith conversations is the idea of religious acceptance. So in Christianity, you put your faith in the stories and in the morals that you're supposed to receive from the stories. And in Judaism, you're always told to question everything, question. Our rabbis rabbi our questions by answering our questions with a question, because we don't typically accept the first answer we're told. We keep looking. And I think, when we were told to leave room for holy envy, that's a practice that I've become a little envious of, the idea of putting faith and acceptance into the morals you're supposed to teach and the ideals you're supposed to get from the stories and the teachings, rather than questioning every single thing that you read. And I think it's a pretty beautiful practice, and it's a really great way for people to connect.
My name is Leia Koritz. I live in Dover, Massachusetts, and I'm a junior at Gann Academy. I could discuss religion for hours and hours on end. I love the breathless feeling that comes with a deep discussion about God, personal beliefs, or prayer. Usually, I have these deep theological discussions with peers at my own school, all of whom are Jewish. Because of my love for these conversations, I was so excited to take part in the Chamberlain Interfaith Fellowship, where I could do exactly what I described above, but this time with somebody who practiced a different religion than me. I immediately fell in love with discussing the similarities and differences between Judaism and Christianity. It had never occurred to me that hearing a different perspective could be beneficial. As my Chamberlain buddy taught me about the Apostles' Creed and the different Christian denominations and all the holidays, I realized something. It is so important to learn with those who have different beliefs than you. It's amazing to coexist, but it's even better to go further, to engage in meaningful conversations and learn from one another. If I hadn't been involved in the Chamberlain Fellowship and just let Christianity coexist beside me, I wouldn't have had the opportunity to learn about so many beautiful traditions and beliefs.
Okay, next we're going to transition from the videos back to some live students, and I'm going to call on Mary to share next.
Holy envy, as detailed by Krister Stendhal, meant that participants of interfaith dialogue should be willing to recognize elements in other religious or tradition or faith that one admires and wishes could in some way be reflected in one's own tradition or faith. And as ironic as it sounds, my heart and mind has been filled with the most beautiful and holiest of envies regarding Judaism. A particular point of envy among many include my admiration surrounding how Judaism includes non-believers. During a group discussion with Mrs. Happel, she noted that when, for example, a child that she's teaching declares their disbelief in God, she tells them to write about it or explore this disbelief or talk about it or lack thereof that they have. For children in particular developmental stages, they may be more apt to questioning or doubting their faith. And Judaism leans into this, allowing individuals to explore their doubts while being included in Judaism. And Mrs. Happel recognized that, of course, she wanted them to have faith. Hahowever, she also still gives them the freedom to explore and flesh out the conflicting notions that they might have. In addition to this, the Happel family provided me with the privilege of attending a virtual Seder, which is a ceremonial dinner for the first night or like the first 2 nights of Passover. Evie, the TBS fellow I have had the privilege of being paired with, informed me that Passover is a lot about welcoming the stranger, and I was fortunate enough to be that welcome stranger. And among the hilarious Kahoot games and Mr. Happel spilling his wine, I did not feel like the stranger, but rather a very, very grateful guest. As I grew up in the Catholic Church, one of the requirements that led to receiving the Eucharist each week was going through the process of Holy Communion, which typically happens at around the age of like 8 or 9. And upon bringing my aunt one time, who was an atheist, to my Catholic church, she wasn't allowed to partake in receiving communion. And I say this not to put down the Catholic tradition, for the reason the Catholic faith like practices this is very deep. But rather, I say this to express how alien it is to me and my faith background to include those who disbelieve in certain, but not all, religious practices. So I want to thank Mrs. Happel, Dr. Modica, Ted Chamberlain, David Feldman, my fellow Eastern students, and my TBS friends for nurturing this beautiful holy envy so thoroughly. A special shout out goes to Evie, the TBS fellow that I was blessed to have been paired with, for answering the abundance of questions, dealing with Wi-Fi disruptions during our one-on-one interfaith discussions. So thank you.
Thank you, Mary. It really was a joy to have you with us at our Seder. Next, I'm going to call on Ryan. I think I did that in the reverse order, so sorry about that. But Ryan, you're next.
That's all right. Hi, my name is Ryan Casper. I'm a junior here at Eastern Biblical Studies major. So what I've learned thus far through this fellowship and through my discussions with my fellow is that there is, I would say there's not really one right practice of religion. And when I say this, I mean like that each practice holds value and that it's really good at recognizing the value of different faiths. So it was really eye-opening to me when Rachel Happel said Judaism carried on as like a sister religion to Christianity, which I thought was a very like neat way and very meaningful way of putting that. Also, I've seen that there's much middle ground between Christianity and Judaism. Like it's not just black and white similarities and differences, much gray, I think, to it. And so I held the belief that interfaith learning was important, but I never thought too much about why until this fellowship. And through it, I gained a large amount of respect and appreciation for a faith that's different from my own faith. So what challenged me the most was experiencing holy envy. So I never thought like the Sabbath or Shabbat was that important to Christianity. It was like a more of an outdated practice. But seeing, hearing, experiencing people faithfully keeping to a tradition, and it was a practice that brought them closer to God, was very moving. So I witnessed Passover Seder with my TBS Fellows family, and just from my takeaway from it, I just seen how inclusive they were, how nice it was, and also just the keeping of tradition, remembering one's history, passing down through the family. Something I could be very envious about. Religious practices like Shabbat and the Passover Seder revealed to me a unifying aspect that I wish was more prevalent in Christianity sometimes. And I just found holy envy in how members of Judaism could find escape from the world to bring focus on God and their own tradition in that way. and it showed me how that kind of sets them apart from the world in that way too. So language like set apart from the world and God's people used to make me think that like Judaism was more of a seclusive religion or seclusive people. But after this fellowship, I like no longer feel that way. I learned about tikkun olam, which means like fixing, repairing the world. Excuse me, and bringing like justice and peace to the world and to creation. And the emphasis is on like restoration, and that kind of reminded me of like our own Christian tradition with the Great Commission or God's call for us, and also learning about. Sorry, I'm losing my voice. Give me 1 second. I'm back. Also, learning about different Christian traditions show me just a tradition that is taking seriously God's word if you're interpreting, debating about it, which I saw similarities to. And I think just it's important to respect these differences and rejoice in our similarities. And I just hope that this many more can come into interfaith dialogue and fellowship like this.
Similarities.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name's Evie. I'm from Natick, Massachusetts, and I'm a junior at Dana Hall School. Something that I've come to really admire about Christianity is the ways that you can use Christianity, Christian teachings, Christian ideas in everyday life. In Judaism, we have tons of blessings for any kind of given everyday activity. And though they're countless, it's not often that you find a blessing that is very specific to a situation. Because they're all pre-written. So at the beginning and end of our joint sessions, Joe Modica and Rachel Happel will often offer a blessing from each religion. And Joe Modica often takes those blessings off the top of his head, speaking from the heart, using Christian ideas to enhance it. And I think that's really beautiful.
Hi, my name is Jacob Schulman. I go to Needham High School. I'm from Needham, Massachusetts, and I'm a junior. And my question was, how has my faith and my religion of Judaism been deepened during this interfaith experience? My answer is actually that Joe Modica, the father of the Christian community, of the Christian fellows, taught me that Judaism is actually kind of like a mother to the Christian religion and other religions, such that you don't have to you have to love your mother. You don't have to like your mother, but you must respect your mother. And that taught me something about Judaism, that it is a respected faith in the world, and that I should continue to deepen my faith and my practice in Judaism because it's so important in world religions.
Okay, and then we'll have Andrew share at this time.
You all hear me? Very loud and clear. Cool. So I'm Andrew. I'm a junior psychology major with a minor in Spanish. And I'd say because of the Chamberlain Interfaith Fellowship, I feel that I've been able to grow deeper in my Christian faith. I find it good to talk about what I believe, with other people who may not see, who may not believe the same things that I do. But as I talk about Jesus, I remember the sacrifice that he made on the cross. And I remember that through Jesus, as I talk about it with other people who may not have the same belief system, who may have different perspectives on what I believe, I remember that through Jesus, I am made right with God the Father. I'm reminded that God didn't have to do what he did, but it was a mighty act of love. And as the book of John says in chapter 15, verse 13, greater love has no one than this, that to lay down one's life for one's friends. And I am very thankful that I get to share my love for the Lord in at least some way. And just to hear other perspectives and other beliefs, it's actually kind of refreshing, to just to hear, and listen to what it is that people believe. And as I talk to other people about what I believe, I end up going deeper into my faith and to why I believe what I do, especially when multiple questions are asked. And while there are a lot of differences between Judaism and Christianity, they're definitely more similar than I had originally thought. And before joining the Chamberlain Interfaith Fellowship, all I had really ever known about Judaism was the stereotypical black hats and black robes, because that's all I had ever seen. That was the only way before that I could identify somebody as Jewish, and I had no idea. I never knew about the different sections of faith. I never really understood many of the historical and biblical aspects about the faith either. And through this program, I've definitely become more appreciative of my faith, especially learning that Jesus was Jewish and that Christianity had basically stemmed from Judaism. And when I learn about the origins of my faith, I begin to understand my appreciation about where it comes from even more. And overall, I've learned so much that it would be difficult to tell you everything and remember every single thing, but I really hope to continue learning, and I really encourage people to be part of this program.
Well, thank you. As you can see, friends, Rachel and I work with just wonderful, wonderful students each year, and we get a lot of joy from the interactions we have with them. Rachel and I are going to do something in a moment, and I'm going to actually take a moment just to explain the term holy envy that you've heard a number of times from our fellows. But I would want to just mention that we do have a CIF alumnus in the Zoom meeting room, Jacqueline Favaroso, who served in the program and then did something extraordinary, friends. She actually spent the summer, a good chunk of a number of weeks during the summer at Temple Bet Shalom in preparation for her senior thesis in missiology and anthropology. And a special thanks to Rachel Haffel for putting all that together for Jacqueline. But if anyone wants to speak to Jacqueline directly or communicate with her, she wrote a wonderful thesis that I have a copy of it. So does David Feldman and Rachel and many others. So it was an extended Chamberlain Interfaith Fellowship, so to speak. I'm going to just take a moment here, and then Rachel and I will talk a little bit about a couple of things. But most we wanted to make sure you understood, at least understand what we mean by this concept of holy envy. Krista Stendahl was an influential and groundbreaking New Testament scholar, and also served as the Church of Sweden bishop in Stockholm, and he served as Harvard University divinity professor until his death in 2008. He had 3 rules of religious understanding. Number 1, when trying to understand another religion, you should ask the adherents of that religion and not its enemies. I think that speaks for itself. Number 2, don't compare your best to their worst. And then thirdly, what we focus in on, particularly in the fellowship, is leave room for holy envy. Simply, what is beautiful, what is mysterious, what is something you want to learn more of in another religious tradition, and perhaps you might even be able to incorporate some of those elements in your own. So that's where we get the concept of holy envy. It's really Krista Stendahl framing it. Another book that has been influential, at least Rachel Happel and I read it one summer together, is by a Christian author, Barbara Brown Taylor, called Holy Envy, Finding God in the Faith of Others. She bases it on Krista Stendahl's notion. And she has a wonderful quotation that I'll end here with. And she says, basically, after exploring teaching other religions in a college course, she says, the only clear line I draw these days is this: when my religion tries to come between me and my neighbor, I will choose my neighbor, since Jesus never commanded me to love my religion. And again, it doesn't mean that our religions aren't important ways of helping us identify of what we believe in the world. But then the question is, how can we learn to love each other as neighbors and continue to flourish accordingly? Okay. Rachel and I will take a few moments, and I'll have Rachel begin. We're going to address a couple of questions that we explore in our own tradition. So number one is, what are some compelling aspects of my own faith tradition? And then secondly, what do we find compelling or holy envy at either Temple Bet Shalom for me or at Eastern University for Rachel Happel? So those are the questions, and then we'll finish up our Windows on the World time together.
Wonderful. Thank you, Joe. I'll start with a few things that I find compelling about my own tradition, which is Judaism. The thing that I think I find most compelling about Judaism is that it is full of practices and rituals that really help us mark time and bring meaning to our lives. And the purpose of that is to separate the holy from the everyday. So we have rituals that take place throughout our day, throughout our week, throughout our year, and throughout our lives. There are practices that help us separate time, as I said, so marking sunrise and sunset, or marking a birth or a death, or other joyful milestones along the way. Practices like keeping kosher and observing the rules of Shabbat that really just help us keep kind of a rhythm and ritual to our lives in a meaningful way. I also really love the rich textual and liturgical tradition that connects Jews all over the world, knowing that we say the same prayers with the same words, no matter where we are in the world. That I could go to a synagogue in Prague or Morocco or really anywhere, and the prayers would be familiar, and they would be said in Hebrew, and I would know, I would be able to participate. And knowing that we also read the same portion of Torah every day, and there's a connectedness to Jews around the world that comes with that. And finally, a sense of commandedness that, through the mitzvot. Mitzvah is colloquially understood to mean good deed, but it actually means commandment. There are 613 of them in the Torah that have been further interpreted and expanded upon in our later books, like the Talmud. And those commandments, those mitzvot, really help us to live ethically. And they help us to do that whether we feel like it or not, because we do it out of a sense of obligation. So, for example, chesed, which means kindness, doesn't just mean be nice to everyone all the time. There are specific acts that come along with that: visiting the sick, welcoming strangers, rejoicing with a bride and groom, comforting people who are in mourning. And there are specific ways that Judaism teaches us how to do that, and certain times at which we are supposed to do it. And finally, the concept of Yisrael, which means to wrestle with God, and that we don't have to have our relationship with God figured out in order to practice Judaism. We can, as Mary reflected, when we work with children, we can really wrestle with that. Do we believe in God? What kind of a God do we believe with? And we can do that throughout our lives and still be fully embraced by the Jewish community and really practice fully. So those are things that I really find compelling about my own faith tradition. And in terms of what I find compelling at Eastern University, so much. I really, one of the main things I would say is the personalization of prayer that I've seen in Christian settings, and particularly at Eastern. In Judaism, we have two different types of prayer. We have keva, which is fixed prayer with fixed words that we say on particular occasions, and also kavanah, which means intention or sincere feeling from the heart. So for example, in Judaism, before a meal, we would say a fixed blessing, the hamotzi blessing, that's familiar. I've noticed that in Christian settings, saying grace before a meal can take many different forms, and it seems to come from the heart of whoever is leading it, with flexibility in the words that are used to really connect them to the moment. I think of a moment at Eastern before the Yacht Club went out to do volunteer work, and we were with them, and before we did anything, there was a moment to say, let us pray, and we stood in a circle, and the person leading it shared prayers that were from the heart, really curated for that moment. And I really love that tradition. I think there's a lot of beauty there. I've also heard from the Eastern Fellows over the year about a really personal relationship with God and the idea of hearing God's voice in their daily lives or speaking directly to God. And that's something that I wish we had more of in Judaism. I love that idea of being able to hear God's voice in your life. And then finally, the accessibility and welcoming. Christianity feels really accessible. And I'm sure it's not easy to be Christian or easy to become Christian, but it feels like there's an open door to it. And the threshold to becoming that is low. To become Jewish, we certainly are also welcoming, but there's sort of a higher threshold to become a practicing Jew. There's a lot you have to be able to do and understand and a whole language to learn. Whereas in Christianity, it feels like you could kind of jump right in and that it feels very, very accessible. And I have always felt so welcomed at Eastern. So that's something, those are 3 areas that I have a lot of envy for. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Rachel. Beautiful. Let me share just a few things about what I find compelling in the Christian tradition for me, and then also share what I find compelling at Temple Bet Shalom when I visit, and what I find with Holy Envy. So some of the compelling aspects of my own faith tradition, that all human beings are created in God's image and likeness. That is really compelling to me. We call that in the Christian tradition, as many of you know, the Imago Dei. People are created in God's image. And because of that, we have a great sense of dignity for human flourishing, that we believe in human flourishing because all people, regardless of who you are or what your place is in society, you are made in God's image and likeness. Another I word, right, we go from Imago Dei, is this concept of incarnation. Incarnation to me is both an anchoring of my faith and also something I live into mysteriously. It simply means that God came in the flesh in Jesus of Nazareth, meaning God became a person in Jesus of Nazareth. And to me, that is compelling. And that is something I hold on to with both arms, so to speak, as I follow Jesus, as I follow his teachings, as I move into the Christian tradition. Another one is hospitality. What does it mean to create spaces of welcome for people like Jesus did? Especially when Jesus says, when I was a stranger in Matthew 25, you welcomed me. So how do we do that? And I find that compelling, hospitality. I think we all know when we have not felt hospitable, I mean, we've not felt the gift of hospitality, we know what that feels like. And I find that Christianity has been able to provide that most often. And then the idea of justice. I know that what I'm saying here certainly relates also to Temple Bet Shalom, but I really think Jesus is speaking, when he speaks about righteousness, he's thinking about justice also. So the question is, what do we do? How do we act justly in the world? And following the teachings of Jesus helps me to frame that. Now, what do I find compelling, wholly envious at Temple Bet Shalom? There are many things. I think, Rachel, I appreciate what you said about Christianity, right? I'm still learning. I'm on a learning curve. But I will say that I find deep meaning in the rituals and the rhythms of Judaism. I think that as I get older, especially, to have a sense of rhythm to my day, to have a sense of a calendar, a religious calendar, and I really, really much love that in Judaism. I also, and for those I know Jacqueline has been to TBS and maybe others, Leary and others, when you walk into Temple Bet Shalom, you're greeted, of course, which is wonderful. But then as you look towards the left, one of the first things you see is a library. And that to me says that there's a great emphasis on education, of thinking about difficult issues, of learning, of study, of debating, of disagreeing, but honoring the process of the life of the mind. Krista Stendahl, as we just mentioned, right? He's kind of the patron saint of the CIF, but he has another quote. Listen to this quote that he had when he spoke about some of the differences between Judaism and Christianity. Krista Sendall said, when Christians meet Jews and they get together, Christians are inclined to say, let's pray together. When Jews, when they meet Christians for fruitful encounter, are often inclined to extend a different kind of invitation. They say, let's study together. Now, this doesn't mean that Christians don't study. Don't hear me wrong. It's just a matter of the emphasis on education. Another one, and finally, that you can belong to a community before you believe. You can belong to a community before you believe. So the sense of belongingness at Temple Bet Shalom is wonderful. I mean, I get an opportunity to speak at the Shabbat service. I mean, that's unique, that's different. I don't experience that in other places. So the question of belonging first before believing. And as you can see, both Rachel and I are continually learning each and every year that we participate in this fellowship. We are coming towards the end of our time together, friends. I'm going to ask Rachel if she has any final comments, and then she can turn it back to me, and then we will dismiss you as we are almost at the time, but we really are grateful that you came today. Rachel?
No final comments other than to say thank you to the fellows, and thanks for everyone for being here today. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you, Rachel. And again, friends, I really appreciate the time you invested to be with us this morning. Thanks again to the Chamberlain family for being here. Thanks for the current fellows and for alumni. We're grateful to see alumni. Thank you for faculty, staff, and administration for taking time to be with us. And a real heartfelt thanks to the Feldmans, David and Sydney Feldman, for what they are doing and continue to do for this fellowship. So God bless you all and have a good rest of the day.